We're back with our book, The Giant Rat of Sumatra, or Pirates Galore. And we're reading chapter 2 today, maybe more. We'll see how we do. There we go. Chapter 2 of Piranha Fish and a Room Full of Villains. I could hear thin sounds of laughter and revelry ashore. Oh, I should show you the picture. That is looking like the sign off of a building called the Red Dolphin. I could hear thin sounds of laughter and revelry ashore. I steered toward the distant noise as if it were a compass setting. Soon a lighted window came glowing through the fog, now beginning to fray into black lace. "Look there," said One-Armed Ginger, with a happy flutter of his eyebrows. "That's me old drink-house, matey, the Red Dolphin, and sounds like Sam'l Spoons himself still leadin' the seafarin' choir. I'd know that cacklin' voice if I was stone deaf." We pulled up on a wet, sandy beach and trudged the few steps to a seaman's tavern, with its red wooden sign dripping the night's fog like blood. Flinging the doors open, One-Armed Ginger burst through the doorway. For an instant, laughter was sucked out of the room. Who was this wild-eyed figure in the middle of the night? The devil himself in brass buttons? "Don't you know me, lads? It's Ginger himself, about to make each sea-going man of you rich as a king. Is that you, Samuel Spoons, you old thief? Don't you remember your old shipmate?" The barkeep, wearing an apron so dirty he might have been cleaning fish, lifted a lantern for a closer look. "Ginger, ain't you been hung once or twice yet? What happened to your arm?" "Eaten off by piranha fish." "Gnawed? Nah." Ginger waved his empty sleeve. "Ain't that proof enough?" "Must have felt a tad unpleasant, matey," exclaimed the barkeep, crossing himself. "I was so soaked in black rum I felt hardly a nibble. I woke up the next morning with me arm dangling in the Amazon River, gnawed to the bone, and I've been One-Armed Ginger ever since." In the shadows of the earthen floor, an otter hunter with long, greasy hair raised his voice. "If that story's true, I'm stupid, mate." Ginger raised a tangled eyebrow. "Then you're stupid, lad. The bottom truth is I'm looking to employ a crew of able-bodied men who won't fret if I make 'em ugly rich. I'll stuff so much gold in your pockets, both knees'll bend like barrel staves. How about you, gents, all three? You there, with your harpoon, is it sharp? Can you strike a barracuda with it?" "A minnow, sir," said a short seaman wearing a black neckerchief. And dance a jig at the same time, can Aussie Twitch. Not that it's any business of yours." Topping off his reply with a laugh. Then, with his bare feet on the sandy floor, he jumped into a sailor's jig. I saw dead flies stuck to the fresh tar of his seaman's pigtail. "You'll do," said One-Armed Ginger, his eyes shooting about. "And the rest of you brave lads, you ain't afraid of the hangman's rope, are you? For we may be sailing outside the law. If there be an ounce of pesky honesty in your bones, there's the door of the Red Dolphin, and it's wide open." No one stirred. I was uneasy standing there. I didn't like the chief's mate's mangy shadow falling across me. What riches was he promising this riffraff? The ship's biscuits? It crossed my mind that my stepfather had drowned with a psalm on his lips, while this rogue was plucked from the sea with curses on his. Where was the sense in the senselessness of it? One-Armed Ginger was grinning. "No one streaking for the door, I see. Well, you with me too, Samuel Spoons?" "I'm too old for that brand of mischief, brother. This whitewashed adobe is treasure enough for old Samuel. Now I've joined the Mexican nation and become an upstanding Californio." "You got come over with holiness?" asked One-Armed Ginger contemptuously. "I seen you crossing yourself every time I paused for breath. I thought you was flea-bit." Aye, to own me own land, I had to take on a full cargo of the king's own religion. Ah, so he's been given land by the king, but had to be willing to be Catholic, probably. Folks kick you out if you ain't been baptized. Everyone in this Bilgewater port goes to mass except sea lions and the coyotes. He crossed himself again. And think how it impresses the natives with me purity, Ginger. You go right ahead with your bloody business and don't mind me. I see you won the loyalty of me guests, as full of greed as their hide'll hold, the lot of 'em. Drinks for the house, commanded One-Armed Ginger, with a generous sweep of his hand. I've found me as fine a set of villains as ever crossed salt water. The barkeep shifted his glance to me. A small portion for the lad. I'll only charge you half. It was as if the chief mate had forgotten me standing beside him. He turned and his cheeks puffed up. Who's told you to stick to me like a pilot fish, cabin boy? He asked. Return to the ship, and when you see Captain Alejandro Gallows himself, give him a salute from me and a respectful thumb of the nose. He burst out a laugh. Samuel, give this shipwrecked boy a candlestick to light his way through the fog. I shook my head. The fog's lifting. I don't need a candle to find the giant rat. Take the blasted light and do as you're told. An empty bottle with a limp candle plugged into the neck was stuck into my hand. Only then did the man's cleverness flash through my mind. As he watched the candle flame recede in the night, One-Armed Ginger could be assured that I wasn't close by and listening at the window. I closed the door behind me and hurried through the sand to the flyboat. I looked back and hesitated only for a moment. Then I planted the candlestick upright on the wooden seat and pushed the flyboat out into the bay. I hardly paused to wonder how I would get back to the ship without it. As the flyboat drifted away, I watched the flame glittering like a toe dancer in the night. Peering back at the red dolphin, I wasn't surprised to see the face of One-Armed Ginger pressed against the window. The man's eyes peered into the night, watching the candle flame growing smaller. Keeping myself low, I crept back to the tavern wall. Once the chief mate's broad face was gone from the window, I raised myself close enough to listen. What bloody venture was One-Armed Ginger hatching inside the tavern? I pressed my ear closer, afraid of what I might hear. So that's the end of chapter 2. You can pause to predict what you think Ginger is up to. Has he got a map to treasure? He's got some plan to make everyone rich, supposedly. And we learn a little bit about both of their characters, right? Do we learn a little bit about the barkeep? We learn a bit about Ginger, that he's all about getting treasure. And we learn a little bit about our cabin boy shipwreck, right? What does he think of the fact that Ginger's trying to get all these guys on his side to go search for treasure? And you've heard that line about, is it really justice that he was saved from the ocean and his poor stepfather, even though he didn't like his stepfather very much? His stepfather wasn't. So kind of interesting. All right, I'm going to go on to chapter 3. Chapter 3, in which One-Armed Ginger tips his hand. That's an expression that means lets out the secret a little bit. And I get an earful. Here's the picture at the start of the chapter. All right. There's treasure sitting at anchor out in the harbor, lads, said One-Armed Ginger. Gold coins from India and jewels from China so bright they'll blind your eyes. I'll risk looking at a feast like that, piped up the otter hunter. I caught sight of his face glowing up like a lantern with sudden greed. Treasure talk is cheap in these waters, said Ozzy Twitch, the harpooner. Treasure, to the touch, is another thing, right? He's saying it's one thing to talk about it. It's another if I can actually touch it. It's there in the captain's own sea chest, replied One-Armed Ginger with a snort. Didn't I see it with my own eyes? Ain't he been hoarding it like a miser through the years? Aye, so he could return here where he was born poor as dirt. Like a fish to his spawning ground, you see, but risen in the world. He'll be taking the longboat ashore at first light to buy himself a hilltop or two. He told me so himself. Aye, quitting the sea, the tall Mexican is, to set himself up like a duke of the realm. My breath caught. Was this how the chief mate was going to repay Captain Gallows for fishing him out of the sea? With robbery? With bloody murder? The harpooner clamped a suspicious eye on One-Armed Ginger. Why are you cutting us in on this, mate? Born generous, were you? Why split the treasure with sea worms like us? One-Armed Ginger flung his fist in the air, almost touching the low ceiling, and pounded it on the bar. Will you tell me how I can tote that heavy sea chest with one hand? I'll tell you, I'll need the tentacles of an octopus. Then lead the way, exclaimed the otter hunter. Tomorrow soon enough? Tonight, replied One-Armed Ginger sharply. I posted no man on watch. Tonight we'll steal aboard, silent as mice, and relieve the captain of the burden. A sharp harpoon at his throat ought to tame him. Not a pretty way to show your loyalty, remarked the harpooner. Treasure is treasure, answered One-Armed Ginger. At that point, I dropped down from the window. I needed to scurry back to the ship and wake the captain. I turned to run and plowed right into the arms of the barkeep in his smelly apron. I thought I saw white eyes at the window, Samuel Spoons declared. I reckon you got an earful. Don't you know me old shipmate'll wring the breath right out of you, like water from a sponge. Touchy as a marlin spike he is. I said nothing. I felt myself wriggling like a caught fish. Well, I don't want murder on me doorstep, said the barkeep. Not good for trade. Come along. Quiet now, sonny. The barkeep dragged me to a rough wooden door at the back of the tavern. He flung me inside and locked the door. I'll let you out before you're full grown. I promise you. Can't let you run off and get your neck run now, can I? I put my back to the wall while a dog began to growl across the pitch-dark room. I stiffened. My heart thundered, not in terror for myself so much as in fear for Captain Gallows about to be croaked in his sleep. The dog's growling ventured closer. I couldn't pick out the beast, but he could sense my body heat approaching him in the moldy, damp-smelling room. Moving slowly, I fished the half-gnawed biscuit out of my pocket. Dog, I whispered, here's some grub for you. A first-rate sea biscuit, hard as a bone. You got yourself a name? You bite? Smell this. I waited, frozen. Then I could feel the dog's breath on my hand. Be quick about it, dog, I muttered earnestly. Grub it down and let me find a way out of here. The dog carried off the biscuit, and a moment later I could hear his teeth grinding away. Now, dog, how can I get out of here? I felt around in the heavy dark. There seemed nothing in the storeroom but barrels and bottles, an anchor chain, and an oar or two smelling of the sea. I found the door and tried it again. It was locked tight. As I moved away, I heard the animal scratching away at the earthen floor. Was he burying the hard-boned biscuit? Near the door? Following the sound, I bumped into the dog. The growling had stopped. I put out a hand to risk petting the animal's back, woolly as a sheep. Easy, mate. Dig if you want to. Maybe you can dig us both out of here. Only as the words left my mouth did I realize what I'd said. Smart dog! Like a blind man, arms stretched before me in the dark, I found my way back to the oars. I chose one, feeling the edge of the paddle. It wasn't a shovel, but it would do. I felt my way back to the door. Stand aside, dog. I dug away as if I were paddling a canoe, for my very life. The hole grew slowly larger. I kept digging away as my mind drifted to the tall captain and the gossip I'd heard in my forecastle bunk. The crew believed he'd fallen into the trade of piracy by accident. While hardly older than me, he'd served aboard a ship in the China trade. He had been taken prisoner aboard the Giant Rat of Sumatra and put to work bailing out the bilge, keeping it afloat, right? Before he was 20, with a commanding boldness and a quick wit, he had raised himself to the position of second and then chief mate. When the ship's master had the carelessness to get himself hung from a Hong Kong gallows, the young chief mate was elected captain and assumed a new name, Captain Gallows. Aye, Calcutta had remarked, the name honored our old master, left hanging aloft as a perch for the bewildered Hong Kong harbor seagulls. I kept measuring the enlarging hole with the blade of the oar. Moments later, I could no longer hear the dog grinding away on the biscuit. Had he slipped out? He had. I fell to my stomach. I pulled myself into the hole, arms out, and squeezed myself out and into the night. I jumped around to the window, hoping to glimpse one-armed Ginger still there, flailing his hand in the air and scheming. But too much time had passed. The tavern had fallen silent. The assassins were already afoot. I turned and ran for the water. So you now know Ginger's plan, and you now know what Shipwreck thinks about it. Shipwreck, I guess, feels some loyalty to the captain and really wants to save him and help him. So, kind of fun. That was the end of chapter 3. We'll start the next recording with chapter 4. Thanks for listening.